As we are literally on the eve of the third direct meeting between Russia and Ukraine, one has to ask, are we intentionally trying to provoke Russia? Now, that has a little bit more bearing than you may think when you see some of the very, very brash statements made by the United States, specifically the U.S. general as part of NATO on a portion of Russian territory that is a very vulnerable and very emotional issue for the Russian side. And what impact is that going to have on the negotiations? More so to that, though, there's more trouble for the Ukraine side than is typically talked about in the West, and they are having some real trouble at home that might undermine Zelensky's ability to do, well, much of anything. And to break some of this down, we have one of our favorite guests everybody always loves, Larry the Shirt Johnson, former CIA analyst and just all-around great guy who's got lots of contacts into Russia, as high as Sergei Lavrov. He's been invited to some meetings there, so you need to pay attention to this guy here. Larry, first of all, just welcome back to the show.
Hey, always glad to be with you, Danny.
Well, listen, let's just jump right into this because we're going to do a bit of like we joked about, a deep dive on sonar21.com where you have a lot of things to say, and we're just going to jump right into that today. So you wrote this piece here, I guess that's earlier today. What did more unnecessary bellicosity from a senior U.S. general raises tensions with Russia? And you have that picture there, which is interesting. But just to let people know kind of what that's at before you kind of jump into that, there was a U.S. General Donahghue a few days back that kind of made a lot of headlines if people had seen it, where he's threatening Kaliningrad. And Donahghue, the general, pointed out that Kaliningrad, Russia, is approximately 47 miles wide and surrounded by NATO on all sides. NATO and the U.S. Army now have the capability, he says, quote, to take that down from the ground in a time frame that is unheard of and faster than we've ever been able to do before, the general said. Quote, we've already planned that and we're already developed it. The mass and the momentum problem that Russia poses to us, we've developed the capability to make sure that we can stop that mass and momentum problem. Okay, first of all, what the hell? Why is he talking about Kaliningrad, and why are we even talking about attacking Russian territory?
I can only assume that because he was with the airborne, that he spent too much time at high altitude without oxygen. Well,
that could explain some things.
Fried a few brain cells. To come out and make this kind of claim actually reflects weakness on the part of the West, and particularly the United States. As I recall, the great home run hitters of baseball, back in our day when we were kids, we weren't around for Babe Ruth, but we were around for Roger Maris and for Hank Aaron. They didn't go around saying, man, I am the greatest. They just quietly handled their business. So this clearly was a message he was trying to, they're saying that the message was intended to bolster morale among the Baltic states, who've been extraordinarily belligerent themselves towards Russia. But Russia ignores them just like anybody would ignore a tiny puppy nipping at them. It's just like, cute, get away, leave me alone. But for Donahghue, he's the commander of United States European Command based in Stuttgart. And it is, he replaced General Cavoli. And Donahghue was also involved with helping plan and execute the debacle of the Ukrainian counterinsurgency counterstrike, counterattack.
Oh, in 2023?
June 2023. So
that's not a great thing to have on your resume.
Oh, no. Well, the sad reality is that none of these generals can point to any kind of victory in terms of, where we went in, we defeated an enemy and brought about peace and brought about an end game that served the interests of the United States. Didn't happen in Iraq, didn't happen in Afghanistan, certainly not happening in Syria. And then here we go to Ukraine. And this has been, we've had some revelations over the last week where I think we begin to realize that this war had long been in the planning in terms of provoking Russia into this, with the fact that the CIA had embarked on a very serious anti-Russian campaign, going back prior to 2014. So here's Donahghue making this claim about Kaliningrad. Now, he can claim it was just to boost the morale of the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and maybe the Poles. But the Russians took it far differently. They took it as this is going to be a direct attack on Russian territory.
And Larry, if you could please, just for our audience who may not know what Kaliningrad is, can you explain what that is to Russia?
Yeah, it's Russia's access to the Baltic Sea. I don't know if you can pull up a map.
I'm looking that as we speak,
where they can see it. So when this had formerly been German territory, and the Russians took it at the end of World War II, but they then and I forget the particular treaty or agreement, but Russia doesn't have direct access to it. It has to transit through, I believe it's Poland to get to it. If you pull it up, but it is it's been considered Russian territory. I didn't put it in the map.
So this is Kaliningrad right here, and you can kind of pull back and you can see there's Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. And so it's just this isolated little location here.
Right.
This is Poland right here. So it's really isolated. This is Russian, but it's Russian territory. Can you tell us a little bit about the history, how this enclave of Russia is still there? And I know this has something to do with at the end of the Cold War.
Well, actually, it was the end of World War II. So that's the Soviets took that. Then with the breakup of the Soviet Union, so the reversion of Latvia or Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania as independent states, as well as Poland, but Russia still wanted to retain that as its main access, one of its main access points into the Baltic Sea up there.
And so they obviously did that. But
yeah.
How important is that to Russians?
It's very important. They're not going to walk away from that at all. And that's what's so surprising about NATO threatening. Yeah, they'd have to mass a number of troops. Russia would see that coming, and then you'd be looking at the possibility even of Russia launching preemptive strikes to stop NATO. So this is they access it through Belarus, and then the railroad line. I don't know. I think it runs through Lithuania. And that was part of, with the breakup of the Soviet Union, it was still Russia's land access to Kaliningrad was assured. They don't have a problem with Belarus. They do have a potential problem with Lithuania. But again, Lithuania, it's got 1.3 million people, 1.6 million.
Yeah, I think its military is like basically a reinforced battalion.
Yeah. It's nothing.
Mistaken.
It's nothing. So, but Russia has not, Russia's not been trying to meddle in Lithuania and control it. They just say, basically, leave us alone. And so here's Donahghue then doing the equivalent of threatening to start a nuclear war. And I watched a couple of Russian channel where one of the former intelligence officers were talking about it, and they weren't amused. Let's put it that way. They didn't think this was just some sort of funny joke. They took it as a dead serious threat.
And what do you suppose the intent is? What are we trying to accomplish by that? Because I mean, we're talking at the presidential level about trying to get the two sides to end the war, and now then we have our European commander talking boisterous about what we can take from Russia. Tell me I'm wrong on this, but is the belief, do you think, to say, yeah, dude, you better have this peace agreement like we want, because otherwise we can kick your ass over here?
Well, that's what Lindsey Graham said.
He did. I don't know if we still have that clip, but he literally said that.
Yeah. So what we're looking at is there is gross ignorance on the part of many, if not most, of our military leaders and political leaders with respect to Russia and its capabilities. We got a hint of how this whole intelligence process with the documents that Tulsi released, and God bless her for doing that. But you saw in that release about Russiagate that there were still some senior analysts in the Directorate of Intelligence that were calling balls and strikes fairly with respect to, at the time, Russia involvement politically in the United States. But they were overridden by the political leadership, the clappers at DNI, Brennan at CIA. And the same applies to this analysis that's being allowed to go forward with respect to Russia, because the CIA does not have good human source within Russia. They have great human source within Ukraine, because the Ukraine is the one giving us all the Russian intelligence. So that's being taken, and instead of evaluating it and subjecting it to some critical thinking. So, for example, when the Ukrainians report, oh yeah, there's 1 million Russians dead. Well, what are alternatives? What should you do to check that out? Well, number one, they publish obituaries in newspapers in Russia. Go through those, collect those, find out what's being done there. Monitor the cemeteries. We got overhead satellites. We can look at are we seeing a mass explosion of graves and expand? There are ways to check that out. That's not being done. So across the board, you've got this disdain and complete disregard for Russian military capabilities, and on top of it, you've got this arrogance that, and you hear from Trump. Oh, well, did you hear him today? Nobody's got more missiles than us. We got more armaments than everybody. And it's like, dude, you guys can't even produce 70,000 155 millimeter artillery shells a month. Shut up. You can only produce 550 Patriot missiles a year, or maybe 700. The numbers vary, but that's total missiles. I mean, that kind of, it's not confined to just Trump. It's in the minds of people like Donahghue. I mean, and look at all the retired generals. You've had Ben Hodges on your show, again, completely out of touch with reality. David Petraeus, ditto. I mean, Stavridis, ditto. And so, what are they? Have we had a mass infection of stupid?
I don't know. I mean, you can maybe forgive Trump for not knowing, just believing whatever he's told. But gosh, it's just really getting harder and harder to. I get these guys say stuff like that, but my operational understanding has always been that inside they really know. But now I'm really wondering, and I wonder if you could talk a bit. Let's look a bit about the actual capacity, what he's talking about there. We saw on that map there, it's 47 miles long. Not an insignificant, it's not a country, but it's not an insignificant military target, first of all. Yeah. And when you see that the Russian capacity for waging conventional war right now is eons ahead of anything that anyone in the West is, much less us, the United States. When he's describing how fast we can take that down, it almost sounds like he's been looking at his PowerPoint briefing slides and not looking at what the Russians have actually done, because, I mean, you kind of had going back to 2023, which you just mentioned. So we should have some pretty fair assessment ability that when you tried to attack the Russians there, didn't go so well. So why do we think that it would go great over here? I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. You've got to look at, I'm not sure what plan he's looking at. Let me put it that way. But if we go back to the 2023 counteroffensive, you didn't have to be Clausewitz or Sun Tzu to figure out that if you're going to attack defended positions, then you're going to need to have some form of air power, as well as artillery, as well as armor to support.
And engineering support.
Yeah, engineering support to demine, take out minefields, and to be able to advance on target. Well, they launched that operation knowing they had no air power. And it's like, and they still expect it to succeed. And even when it failed, and the Ukrainians suffered enormous casualties, they still, there was no willingness to admit error or admit defeat. So that's what I think. In what Donahghue's looking at is that NATO has carried out exercises simulating the capture of Kaliningrad. So they've done military exercises. My understanding is they've only been done as tabletops, but they've done it. And so, man, when you're doing tabletop and and you control all the players, it's easy to, come to a quick victory.
Well, yeah, that's the key. And I've been in a number of these computer simulations or tabletop situations, and man, I could tell you stories about the future combat systems, all the things that they projected this force would do in the future, and I watched them control the inputs of the enemy force in there, and I was going, wait, fellas, that ain't gonna work. That's not how they actually fight. And they just said, yeah, don't worry about it. And of course, what do you know? Turns out we won a resounding victory every time they ran the simulation. I fear it's something like that.
Remember, and at the end when they do the hot wash, they said this was the best exercise ever. Remember? I was involved with over 253 of these during.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, from 1994 up through 2016. So we did.
So did you see some that were good and some that were bad?
No, they were all. It was like Groundhog's Day. Reliving the same thing over and over and over. Nobody learned anything. You're supposed to come into this with takeaways. Instead, it was always gaming it so you would win it. I even saw this once with we were up at Otis Air Force Base in Massachusetts. This is where the Kennedys John F. Kennedy used to go when he was president for summer. And we were testing. It was a group at the time. It was called the FEST. It's now unclassified, called the Emergency Support Team. But it was an interagency team that would deploy in the event of a terrorist attack. One of those components was the CIA's incident response team. And we had a house that was a target. And they went up 2 days in advance before the exercise to ask the military commander, hey, could you cut down that fence and take down that tree so we could get better sight?
Like we would do in real life.
Yeah. And so the military is doing the same thing. Donahghue's doing the same thing. They've got these great things that look wonderful on paper, but they're forgetting that, you know what? The Russians have a say in this as well.
They do.
Yeah. And that's what's so it's like, why, if you're trying to establish peace with Russia, why, it's like if we've had a dispute as neighbors and I said, hey, Danny, I'd like to talk to you, but I am going to come over and kick your ass later. You'd be going, I'm not sure I want to have him as a neighbor, much less as a friend. So what are we doing? Is Trump serious about trying to restore relations with Russia, or are we just suckering them along to entice them to drop their guard so we can then sucker punch them? Because what concrete steps has the United States taken to ease tensions with Russia? Restore the property the United States took from them? No, haven't done that. Drop the travel restrictions? No, haven't done that. Reopen consulates? No, we haven't done that. Appoint a new ambassador? No, we haven't done that. Send more weapons to Ukraine? We've done that.
We've done that. Yeah. So we got to block the check there. That'll bring peace. But speaking of peace, so what is on the ground is about ready to happen in Istanbul tomorrow. There's supposed to be the third direct face-to-face meet between the Ukrainians and the Russians. So it's like, great. Trump gets some credit because at least he's talking to people and trying to bring folks together and encouraging the two sides to talk, which was completely opposite on the Biden side. Never, he ran from that kind of thing. But okay, but let's take a look at what's going on. So heading into that, we have Dmitry Peskov, who says, okay, important to talk, but we need to have some things in mind that this is going to be a lengthy process.
Ну, разумеется, все-таки президент Трамп – это президент крупнейшей страны мира, крупнейшей экономики мира. И плюс, уже все привыкли, так сказать, к его достаточно жесткой и прямолинейной риторике. Вместе с тем он подтверждает свои намерения дальше делать все возможное для того, чтобы способствовать мирному регулированию. Собственно, президент Путин неоднократно говорил о своем желании как можно быстрее перевести украинское регулирование в мирное русло. Это длительный процесс, он требует усилий, он непрост. И, скорее всего, в Вашингтоне все больше и больше это понимают.
Okay, first of all, I got to ask, why is he walking? It's really distracting to me that they were walking down as they were talking. I just wanted to look at him, but I digressed here a little bit. But he says, yeah, it's good that we're talking. It's good that Trump is having the conversation, but everybody knows this needs to be a very lengthy process. It's not something a war is not something a 3.5-year war at that is not something you get over with very quick. But as Doug McGregor said on our channel earlier today, it's like the American side is looking for a microwave option where he just goes in, picks up the phone, talks to somebody, and the problem's solved. Trump doesn't seem to be very interested in doing processes.
Yeah. Well, Russia's been very clear. You know, we've gone through, we're on a third stage now. First stage was in April of 2022, where in the talks in Istanbul, they had actually they had an agreement in principle. And it was what Lavrov told Judge Napolitano and Mario and me when we met with him 1st of March, was that proposal had actually come from the Ukrainians, and the Russians were willing to sign off on it. And it would have left Donetsk and Luhansk as part of Ukraine, but it would have guaranteed the rights of the citizens of those two republics, or oblasts at the time, to preserve their freedom, the right to speak Russian, and other things. Well, the United States sabotaged that.
And I'm sorry, by the way, do I understand correctly that also the framework included, once it got to a certain point, that all the Russian forces would withdraw out of the territory?
Yeah. So Russia was willing to do that. Hey, just all the primary goal was that Ukraine would say, okay, we're going to withdraw. We're not going to have anything more to do with NATO. We'll make sure NATO troops are out. We'll be strictly neutral. And that's all Russia wanted. Well, so that went away, and now Russia had to shift to a military strategy instead. And so Putin laid out the next demands. They had the elections in Zaporizhia, in Kherson, as well as Donetsk and Luhansk. They all chose to return to Russia and become part of the Russia Federation. So they're federal republics now of Russia. And in June of 2014, 2024, it was June 14th, 2024, Putin met with the foreign ministry senior officials, and he laid out, okay, this is what it's going to be going forward. Those four, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk, they're going to stay with us. They're not going anywhere. They are permanently part of Russia, as is Crimea. We want the West to recognize that territory. Ukraine needs to reduce its army and end all NATO participation in NATO exercises, foreign military support. It has to become more of a defensive force. And some other items. That was in June. That was the essence when they met 3-4 weeks ago in Istanbul. That was the essence of what Russia presented in that paper, laying that out. And the Ukrainians go, oh, no, we can't accept that. Well, because then Russia told them
that's what Gary had on the screen a minute ago, that 12-point plan. That's the one from Istanbul a few weeks back.
Correct.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but this one was a lot worse for Ukraine than the June 2024 options.
Yeah, it toughened it up a little bit. And then implicit in this, and this is where I was going to what we're into the third phase, that Putin has said, wherever Russians set foot on the territory, that's going to stay Russian. So they're now in Sumy.
Yeah. I was about to say there's 3 more.
They're in Dnipropetrovsk. So there's 3 more are going to be on the table, and in Odessa too. So the conversation on tomorrow is going to surround that 12-point plan, and then Russia's going to reiterate, since we last met, let us identify all the different territory we're taking. I mean, they're on the verge of taking Pokrovsk right now.
Yeah.
And once they break through at Pokrovsk, that's going to be a significant breakthrough point in the defensive line. And they can open up more territory. And I'm sure the message to the Russians is, we'll stop now where we are. We're not giving back Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, or Zaporizhia. We're keeping that. We're keeping Crimea. That's never returning to you. But we may be willing to let you have back Dnipropetrovsk, Sumy, and Kharkiv, provided you kick NATO the hell out. They leave. You get rid of the CIA. They've got to get out. And you become a neutral state. Now, Ukraine's not going to do that. At least Zelensky's not. And the corrupt crew around him, they're not going to accept that. So, this what's going to happen out of this, I believe, is it will be portrayed. The messaging from the West will be that Russia is intransigent and refuses to negotiate in good faith, and therefore our only option is to take them on militarily.
Okay. Well, as it turns out, we don't have to wait till tomorrow for that view from the West, because we had Volodymyr Zelensky very kindly, very detailed lay out what his diplomatic expectations are.
The main task of Ukrainian diplomacy is to promote everything that protects Ukrainian life in Ukraine first and foremost, and everything that hurts Russia for this war. And each of you must be specific in your own results for the sake of our people, for the sake of Ukraine. This is not pathos, it is true. I believe that this is the main goal. The first is weapons. Of course, we will not publicly discuss the details in each area now, but each of you knows what is in your countries, what are the opportunities for cooperation between joint productions. We now have a truly global cooperation, the largest ever built for Ukraine. But this does not mean that we can stop expanding the activity. We should always look for a new format.
So hurt Russia and get more weapons. That's our diplomatic thing heading into Istanbul. So not sure that's going to really do much of anything for anyone.
Yeah, and that's why Russia is saying, look, we're willing to pursue a diplomatic track, but that doesn't mean we're going to commit suicide, because we're going to defeat you, Ukraine, military, not just you, Ukraine, you, NATO, militarily. And all the who was it? I get to steal this. It's like they refer to Germany and France as two bald-headed men fighting over a comb.
Okay, hadn't heard that one.
Yeah, it's a great one. But that's really the West. I mean, they talk about, oh yeah, we're going to send let's send 10 Patriot missile batteries. Okay, and just do the math. A missile battery, a Patriot battery, has 4 launchers. Each launcher has 16 tubes. So that means if you got, for each of those launchers, you're going to have 16 missiles. That's 64, if my math is correct. Now, multiply that times 10. That's 640 just in those 10. And that means they fire once and then they're done because they don't have anything to reload. That is the entire production of Patriot missiles for a year. What the hell are these people smoking? I mean, it is so divorced from reality that they can't do. I can add, I can subtract, I can do division and multiplication. That's about my math skill. But it suffices for this to do a basic analysis. The numbers don't add up, particularly when you consider the fact that you fire 2 to 4 Patriots at even a Garand drone coming in to take it down. Oh, the Garand drone, I was corrected. I thought I'd heard it was $50,000. No, my bad. It's $20,000.
Yeah.
Each PAC-3 Patriot missile costs $7 million. So let's say 4 of those, that's $28 million to take down a $20,000 drone. Are you kidding me? This should be a Monty Python skit. It's so bizarre. But yet you've got people like Donahghue, and then your Ben Hodges and your David Petraeus and your Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth saying the most imbecilic things and not understanding the basic logistics that undergird all of this.
And you know what, Larry, you also have playing, as I mentioned at the outset of this, there's a new problem for Ukraine. Now, you mentioned the math problem, and that is potentially fatal all on its own. We've also got the manpower problem. Ukraine can never match what the Russians have. You have the equipment problem, the ammunition problem that you also just talked about. That's something you can't undo. But you've had, from the outset, you've had the Zelensky, and I think you and I've talked about this on many occasions, where he goes in, he's talked about how he's been this nation's what's the guy's name from Great Britain,
Starmer.
Well, yeah. And Starmer is calling him, here is our Churchill of this age, wearing a Churchill and a T-shirt and all that. And every time he goes out somewhere, to include the European Union Commission that he recently did, huge rousing ovations. And so no matter what things happen, no matter what the math is, he's now like, everywhere he goes, he gets reinforced that, yes, I'm all that. Well, that is having a problem at home. Now, he gets feted all over the world, in the Western world. But now that at home, he's having some more problems, because people are getting tired of this stuff, because they can do math and they do see the casualties mounting daily. They do see the line moving against them at home. And all of a sudden, the home front is starting to wobble. Here is Artem Dimitruk, one of the members of parliament, being pretty harsh on Trump, on Zelensky.
Russian leaders could come to any terms with Zelensky, because Zelensky is not a legitimate president. He is not a representative of an authority figure in Ukraine, a representative of the people of Ukraine. He's just a person who seized power in Ukraine, simply a terrorist. So until this thing is not resolved in Ukraine, we cannot speak about any tangible results of the negotiations.
I had to double take on that and check. I'm like, wait, maybe that was mismarked. Was that a Russian member of parliament? Because he said that Zelensky was an illegitimate president, because isn't that supposed to be the talking points from the Russian side here? But this is a Ukrainian member of parliament. Yeah,
well, it does appear that there is now a coordinated effort to dump Zelensky. You had the information leaked to Cy Hirsch, and and I know how that works with Cy. People call him up and say, "Hey, Cy, here's the story for you. This is what I'm hearing. This is what we're seeing." And so he reports about the efforts to remove Zelensky, replace him with Zelensky. You've seen that same theme now picked up in other Western media, and you're getting these renewed rumblings in Ukraine, and you've seen Zelensky start to move against some of what would be viewed as political opponents. He just shut down the bureau that investigates corruption. They weren't doing a very good job of it, but they were somewhat independent. But he's now taking that fully under control. So
yeah, we actually had the Wall Street Journal article about that very thing, actually, because that's what I'm going to say. Zelensky, if that's true about what Cy Hirsch, and I've heard people say it is and it's not, he's not doing himself any favors, because this proposed law, he says, is a move to get rid of the NABU, I think it's called. The proposed law is the latest move against anti-corruption institutions and activists in Ukraine. Earlier this month, Vitaly Shabunin, a co-founder of the Anti-Corruption Action Center, was charged with fraud and evading military service. Shabunin and by the way, I have heard from some sources within the Ukrainian government that that's one of the things they threaten people with if they don't do what they're supposed to, that they'll send either them or their family members to the front line. And apparently that's what they're looking at for him. Shabunin has said that the charges are bogus, and other activists warned that they were designed to send a message: those who investigate corruption in Zelensky's office will be punished. And on Monday, investigators conducted a series of searches in relation to at least 15 NABU employees. So he is going after everybody in there that does corruption. And then he portrayed this as a really good deal for Ukraine. It's going to get rid of a lot of bureaucracy so that we can innovate faster on the battlefield, etc. How do you see it?
Yeah, no, we're watching the end game as these people maneuvering in desperation. I know for a fact, as of 2 weeks ago, that the DOD's investigative, the criminal division has actually opened a case about the corruption in Ukraine and money coming out of it that has been funneled into the hands of American politicians, both senators and members of the House of Representatives. So that investigation is now underway, and they're rooting out the corruption of the money that was being stolen by Zelensky. So the activities on the battlefield are being played out with these activities to try to stay in control. This is all his maneuvering to try to retain control, but I don't see how he sustains it. And I thought actually he would have been gone long before now. He's turned out to be pretty resilient, but the end is near.
Right. And in fact, here's a little bit more evidence. As bad as that is, it gets worse. Here is the Spectator magazine from just a couple of days ago. I'm going to show you several parts of this because I think that they're really jaw-dropping and should alarm anybody who doesn't realize that we're in the end game. Is that the Ukrainian morale, according to this article, Ukrainian morale had admittedly been very high for much of the war, but is now collapsing. Back in October 2022, even 6 months after 6 months of violence and bloodshed, 88% of Ukrainians believed that they would be in a flourishing country inside the EU within a decade. Now, 47% think that Ukraine will be a depopulated country with a ruined economy. So almost actually more than a reversal here. You have nearly a majority thinking that they're going to be a depopulated country. And a separate survey found that 70% of Ukrainians also believe their leaders are using the war to enrich themselves. 70%. Nothing is more corrosive to wartime morale than the idea of a nation's leaders are stealing as its people fight and die. So that tells you that there is a movement going on now, gaining momentum, that the people are getting fed up with this. And you can have these laws, you can throw people in jail, but when you have 70% of your population thinking that you're using the war to enrich yourself, it's not too much further from there before support collapses.
Well, and then the CIA has always had a good relationship with the SBU. They're basically the CIA equivalent in Ukraine, who is at odds with Zelensky. And so it would not at all be surprising that part of, an information operation to be able, whether it's true or not, to at least put out the information that, there is growing popular opinion against Zelensky. In other words, you create a narrative that it becomes necessary to remove him. I think there are clearly objective reasons to remove him. And that's one of the things the Russians have insisted on and will continue to insist on in the negotiations. Any ultimate agreement cannot be signed by Zelensky. It's got to be signed by somebody who's actually been elected by the people. Zelensky has overstayed his term by declaring martial law. He is no longer, at least in the Russian eyes, a legitimate president. And as you said,
apparently that member of the parliament's
a member of the Ukrainian parliament reinforced that.
It goes on, continues on. It says, Gary, if you can put that second one up there from the Spectator, Ukraine has two. No, I'm sorry, that's the last one. If you can go to the other one, that's the one. Perhaps the most shocking of all is the recent arrest is that of Vitaly Shabunin that was mentioned in the Wall Street Journal piece, one of Ukraine's most prominent anti-corruption activists who has been charged with evading military service and fraud. Shabunin, the chair of the Anti-Corruption Action Center Executive Board and a leading watchdog, attacking the government soon after his arrest, quote, taking advantage of the war, Volodymyr Zelensky is taking the first but confident steps towards corrupt authoritarianism. So it's like he's now shredding all this pretense to be this leading beacon of democracy. And, this is good against evil, Russia against Ukraine, because Zelensky's the good guy. And now all of a sudden his own people are saying, listen, this guy is an authoritarian who's just shredding our Constitution. So again, the regular people are moving further in this direction.
Didn't you play a clip of Max Boot yesterday on one of your programs?
Yeah.
Yeah, where he was talking about
We've cleansed the hard drives now, so don't worry. It doesn't
Yeah.
have any residual damage.
But he's talking about the democratic, how democratic Ukraine is. I mean, just sit and watch. Boot has always been a moron, but man, he overqualified for that yesterday with that commentary, because here you got clear evidence of Zelensky locking up political opponents. Now Zelensky charging the head of the corruption bureau with corruption, because the corruption bureau actually was finding corruption and it was pointing back at Zelensky. The attack on the church, the shutting down of free press, and the canceling of elections. Now, again, that's not my understanding of what democracy is. Okay, yeah, I think we have another
Here,
word
you
for
have
that.
You have that clip handy?
But
I'll grab it. I'll grab it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think it's important to see. Yeah, it's because if you didn't see that show yesterday, it's jaw dropping, because I think it was made just a couple of days ago, and in line of everything that we're talking about, in line of the show that we did earlier with Doug McGregor today, where we talked a lot about Pokrovsk, which you mentioned, and how vulnerable they are on the Eastern Front, and the whole math problem that you just laid out, and this guy. Wow! Whenever he pulls this up, he'll just pop it in there. But
but Boot has always, he's a hardcore Zionist neocon. I mean, he is he will constantly cheer on Israel's genocide, and he will do everything. It's this Jewish hatred of Russia. I mean, that's what it really traces back to, because if we have to go back to the 1970s, when the Zionist movement emerged to advocate for the freedom, that Russian Jews could escape the Soviet Union and move to Israel, which is one of the reasons today you've got like 1.5 million out of the 8 million population are still citizens of Russia. They still have Russian passports. But that kind of the craziness we see with respect to Ukraine is transfers over into the war in Gaza.
Well, okay, Gary has it up there for this folks passes for elite foreign policy thought in the United States of America today.
They have said that Ukraine just can't win this war in Ukraine.
Well, I think the evidence shows that Ukraine is winning the war, because since the initial Russian invasion, the initial Russian invasion was actually in 2014, but since the Russian invasion ramped up in 2022, Russia did make some immediate gains. But since then, there's hardly been any change on the battlefield. I mean, Russian troops are advancing at a pace slower than troops were on the Western Front in World War I. For very minimal gains, Putin is paying a very heavy price. I mean, Russia has lost roughly 1 million troops killed or wounded, huge numbers of tanks, artillery pieces, armored personnel carriers, aircraft, ships, all these other types of military hardware. So Russia, and despite all that, Ukraine continues to function as a pro-Western democracy. I mean, I think anybody who's been to Ukraine during the war, as I have been, comes away incredibly impressed.
Wow, yeah, Larry, I'm educated here, and I guess this is why he has a Washington Post column, is why they elevate people like this to be their voice on foreign policy stuff, because I didn't realize that the side that's losing territory is actually winning the war. Now I understand how it works. So,
losing territory, cannot build its own tanks, cannot build its own artillery, cannot build artillery shells, cannot build and field combat aircraft that can stay aloft without getting shot down, has an inability to have any kind of air defense system now, are totally reliant upon the West for that.
But
smells like victory. Smells like victory. I mean,
I know this is serious stuff, but gosh,
and this is where it gets serious. He's not alone. You've got U.S. generals who believe just like he does. Now, it's not that I've got some special insight, but like I said, I can do basic math. I can read. And when we look at the reality of what was supposed to happen on the Ukraine side against what has happened. So every week now, there's been an exchange of bodies where the Russians get the bodies of dead Russian soldiers returned to them from the Ukraine side. I think the exchange last week was the Russians got 19 dead Russian soldiers. The Russians turned over 1,000 dead Ukrainians. That is, approaching like a 50-to-1 casualty differential. And that wasn't an aberration. That the same pattern has been repeated now since the last Istanbul talks, when they agreed to exchange bodies. And I guess the last one was like 6 weeks ago, maybe 7 weeks ago. But the point is, the gross number of dead on the Ukrainian side, and it's reflected because they're having to build new cemeteries. Russia's not. And so if you ignore objective facts like that, but I had a question for you. If you took a brand new recruit into the Army, how long would it take to get them trained where they could operate a tank under your command?
Just at the crew level, we could probably get a good 4 or 5 months of that, probably.
Yeah. So 4 to 5 months. That's not what Ukraine's doing. In fact, whenever they try to bring guys together for training, the Russians hit them with a missile, an Iskander or a Kinzhal. So the problem they now have for Ukraine, and it's not solvable in the short term, is where do you get the trained manpower? That is, just having a warm body out there doesn't do you any good.
You can just throw anybody in a uniform that's not a trained soldier. That's very clear.
Yeah. So, Ukraine has no solution to that. The only solution would be they're going to have to take their people out of the country and in a secure facility where they could be trained, but for 3 to 4 months. But then what happens? They're in Poland or Romania or France, and they're going.
And they don't come back.
Yeah. Hey, I like it here.
Yeah, nobody's shooting at me here.
Yeah.
And that just kind of underscores because Zelensky's in charge of all that. He's the commander in chief. And the last comment here I want to make from that Spectator magazine I thought was the most damning because it was from a former Zelensky cabinet official. It says, perhaps the most shocking of all the recent, no, not that one, Gary. I think the one you had up there. Yeah, the Ukraine has two enemies, two Vladimirs, Zelensky and Putin, says a former Ukrainian cabinet minister, once a strong Zelensky supporter. That's key. Putin is destroying Ukraine from the outside, but Zelensky is destroying it from within by destroying its will to fight and its morale. Human rights are being trampled on. There is pressure against political opponents. Rich and influential people who could support opposition are being expropriated, and opposition media is being silenced. And the irony that this Putinification of Ukraine is being funded by the West. So that is some real bitterness in there that, listen, I used to support this guy, but now he is Putin. He has become Putin. So now then we got the actual Putin bombing Ukraine from the outside, and then we got this wannabe Putin on the inside. So that just shows you how demoralized so many people in Ukraine are. And then they see the West doing exactly what you just talked about here, whether it was Max Boot or these generals or Hodges, any of these other guys. And how horrible is it? We talk about this a lot, how horrible it is for these poor Ukraine soldiers who were sent to die in these pointless battles that can only just slow the death and slow the loss, but it can't reverse anything. So their lives are literally being thrown away for nothing. And yet we cheer it on at this level.
Well, there's Ukraine is, I think we can now realize, thanks in part to Tulsi Gabbard's release of those documents surrounding Russiagate, that Ukraine is simply a pawn. It's a tool that's being used as part of some broader plan, an intent to destroy Russia. We saw that with Tim Weiner, the author of The Legacy of Ashes. He wrote a piece in Foreign Policy, one of the deep state journals that comes out. And this came out before Tulsi released this information. And in it, he was touting the, basically the Trumps, and Trump and his team are toadies of Putin. They're stooges. They're being used. And he was, to make that case, he was talking to a recently retired guy named Sylvester, who is the director of operations. So DDO is the one that oversees all of the U.S. intelligence officers working overseas to recruit spies. But in the course of writing this article, he told the story of Tomas Rakusan. Rakusan had been Sylvester's predecessor. And here's Rakusan. He's the head of the CIA's spies. He's the one that sends them out to recruit spies. He's the one that oversees the gathering of all human intelligence. And what he said in there was that Rakusan was being quoted as he was going to do anything to get back at the Russians for having stolen the 2016 election. And he was ordering his people, and I'm quoting now, to go out and recruit terrorists to attack Russia. Now you got to stop there and step back and go, whoa, wait a second. Here is this top guy. There's nobody above, the only body above him is the director of the CIA and then the president, okay? He's only one step from the president. This guy in charge of the CIA in 2016 and in 2017 genuinely believed that Russia had stolen the election, even though they had clear intelligence that that was a lie. And based on that lie, they're building 24 laboratories, facilities in Ukraine. For what purpose? Not to benefit the health of the Ukrainians, not to provide jobs for Ukrainians. So there was something deep, dark, and evil going on through all of this. And here you had this war. In fact, this went on while Trump was still president. It was happening under his nose. And he didn't know about it. And you got to come back and even ask the question, why the hell didn't his director of CIA release those documents, or his director of national intelligence, both Grinnell and Ratcliffe? Where the hell were they?
Yeah, that was a question I've been asking as well.
Yeah. So
listen, we're running short on time here, and there's one more thing I want to get to, because that's kind of a positive thing that these information's coming out now from the Trump administration. But there's some other problems about this whole Epstein thing, which is roiling just all kinds of stuff inside, and it's trying to be suppressed. You have on sonar21.com, you said that $1 billion is not a hoax.
Yeah.
What's going on with this here, with this Epstein thing?
When you go back and look at all the money that's been paid out to victims,
that's what that is right there. That's a list of the money paid out.
Yeah, and so Leon Black and Prince Andrew, they had to pay money to victims of the sex trafficking, of the abuse. What's really going on with this is there's a lot of diversion being put out by Trump. Yeah, part of the problem is Trump had a 15-year relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not suggesting that he was a frequent visitor to the island, but Michael Wolff, the author, says clearly he's seen photographs of Trump with topless women, topless girls sitting on his lap. You've got that, but the real thing here is the failure of the Department of Justice to take the statements, the evidence from all of these girls who have gotten civil settlements in many cases, and turn that into criminal indictments, because the names, they keep saying, oh, there's no list, or yeah, of course there's no list yet, but you do have a lot of names that have been raised in affidavits by these girls who were trafficked, and that requires investigation to determine, is it true or not? Can you corroborate it? Is it just one girl, identifying one individual with no proof? Or do you have 6 different girls saying, yeah, that guy did the same to me? And then can you corroborate that he was on that island, but based on travel law or the list of passengers on the plane? They're right, but that's the point. DOJ has refused to do an investigation.
Let me ask you this: other than Ghislaine Maxwell, Has anybody associated with this? And apparently there's like 200, I guess, women that were abused at some point over the years it was going on with this. Has anyone been convicted of anything and paid a price?
Yeah, Jean-Luc Brunel. He was he came up with, he worked with Epstein and had a modeling agency. He went to prison in France and hung himself. There's a theme emerging here. And there was one other individual in Europe, but that's been it. Four people told.
Prince Andrew kind of got censured, I guess, to put on house arrest inside the palace, I suppose, something to that effect. But otherwise, all these hundreds, and God only knows how many people actually went out to these places and did stuff.
Right.
Is that information knowable? Who all went to the island and stuff?
Yeah, it is. I mean, they've got the list of the flight logs. You've got pilots on those planes. They've been interviewed. You had even stewardesses, flight attendants on those planes that have been interviewed. You had other employees. They were all interviewed and deposed. And so there is a vast mountain of actual evidence out there that at least needs to be looked at and looked at hard. The problem is the charges would be brought against people who are very prominent. Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, his name has been identified by many of the women as someone that they were compelled to have sexual intercourse with. So now Kraft can deny that, and then that's where it's important to get into a situation of looking at actual evidence where people don't say they were unfairly maligned. I mean, you had Alan Dershowitz saying, he's admitted openly in public, well, he went to Jeffrey Epstein's mansion in New York City. He got a massage, but he kept his underwear on. He made a point of that. I kept my underwear on. What a freak show.
Yeah. So what I mean, I was talking about this recently, that when you look at Trump all the way through, and I mean from 2015 when he first started running all the way through, almost nothing ever spooks him. Nothing ever. It's like water off a duck's back. The whole Access Hollywood tape. I mean, he didn't sweat about a drop on that. But he looks spooked on this one, and I've never seen him like that. And what do you make of that as a CIA analyst?
Well, because if Michael Wolff is to be believed, and the reason I think he has credibility is Epstein had approached Wolff about writing a book about Epstein back before Epstein, got arrested. And this was back in 2014, 2015. And so Epstein showed Wolff photos. In one, and I'm quoting Wolff now, there were a bunch of topless girls, and Donald Trump had a stain on the front of his pants, and the girls were laughing at him. So, he might. Now, I'm not suggesting that Trump was a visitor to the island or that there's sexual blackmail, because candidly, if the Biden administration had any of that material, I don't doubt for a minute they would have put it out.
Yeah, I do doubt for a minute, though, because you can't selectively pull that stuff out. And then the evidence suggests that there's probably plenty of prominent D's on that list that they can't, you know what I mean? It's like,
actually,
expose them all or expose none of them.
Well, actually, you could lose that other evidence. That wouldn't be the first time that they've destroyed evidence.
Well, okay, that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, you don't, because if you release that, you don't have to say, oh, yeah, we got a bunch of other stuff with all these other Democrats. But you're right. There are a number of Democrats on it. I mean, Bill Richardson, who's now deceased, he was listed on it, and Bill had quite a reputation for womanizing when he was, governor and then senator. So that has Trump spooked, correct, and it wouldn't be so much of an issue if his son, Don Jr., hadn't made a point about it. We've got to get to the bottom of this. If Dan Bongino hadn't been screaming at the top of his lungs on his radio show, we got to get to the bottom of this. There's dirty stuff here. And if Kash Patel himself. So, they brought it on themselves. And now they're involved with the cover-up. What's the reason for the cover-up? Is it to protect Israel? I believe that's part of it. Is it to protect Trump? I believe that's part of it. But the bottom line is there has not been a legitimate, full-scale investigation of this material in order to hold people accountable. They want to say, now that Epstein's dead, it's, the main guy's gone, so let's move on. Move along, folks. Nothing to see here.
But you have Mike Johnson, who said that, I think we should do some investigation into this. And then when they said, okay, well, let's have some hearings. Well, we don't really have time now. Maybe after the recess here. So maybe he's going to buy him some time. But my question to you is this going to go away? Is Trump going to successfully just distract us with whatever else over here and go on something else and just ignore it and call his people dumb who follow it? I mean, what do you think?
No, it's not. If Candace Owens is a barometer, and I think she is, if Dave Smith is a barometer, Dave Smith came out in strong support of Trump, as did Joe Rogan. So at least those three, they have quite a bit of influence in social media. Candace is not letting this go. She is, because Trump has now attacked her integrity and attacked her honesty. And calling her stupid. I mean, anybody that believes this is stupid, he said. And so she starts off the show saying, hey, welcome to the show of the stupid and the deplorables.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and so, it's not going to go away. I'm sure there are some in the Trump's MAGA world that were angry about this, but they'll forget about it. But I think there's a strong segment. I don't know how large it is, but it's an element that Trump can't afford to lose, and he's lost them. They're not coming back because this he made a promise and he's not keeping it.
Well, we'll certainly see how this goes and how it unfolds. We may have to wait until after the August recess to find out what happens into September, but like you said, I don't think that people are going to let this go. And if Johnson comes back in September and doesn't set a pretty quick date for some hearings, then I think it's going to flare back up again. But
I think it'll hinge on what they hear back home. If they get back home and they start getting an earful, what the hell? Why are you covering up on Epstein? Then they're going to recognize, okay, we got a political problem here, Mr. President. The base is not happy, and I think that the members of Congress are going to hear a lot of that. So, and remember, there's always some surprise in August. Every August, there's always some surprise that spins the political world off in a direction they didn't necessarily anticipate. And I don't think this August will be any different.
Yeah, well, we are certainly going to see. Whatever happens, we will be on top of it here. We'll be looking at sonar21.com where you keep things up to date all the time. I'll be looking at that, and we'll look forward to hearing you back when you come back as well.
Thank you, sir. Always a pleasure.
And just to let you guys know, if any of you desire podcast, or some of you people like to listen to podcasts instead of watching it, that's great. Just go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and you'll find us waiting there for you. Thank you very much, folks. And we will look forward to seeing you tomorrow on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.